Mr. Leshy, is there a misunderstanding about the Endangered Species Act to the extent to which, according to your testimony, it's used about half the time by plaintiffs claiming there is not enough regulation and about half the time by plaintiffs claiming there is too much regulation? So it comes from both sides using this mechanism. Is that correct? Almost in equal measure. What's the impact in terms of the relationship between the government and ordinary citizens if we remove this ability to have access to the courts?
Well, I think it would be problematic, Mr. Markey. It is an equal access to justice situation. It's also very common in not only environmental laws, but all kinds of other regulatory laws where people can challenge the government's compliance in court if they think there's too much regulation or not enough. And that's the reason we have an independent judiciary. This really goes back to the founding of the country. And in my experience, actually, the government under the Endangered Species Act gets sued about the same amount by both sides, and actually I think both sides win about the same amount of time, although the government wins most of the time, as I said, and I think that's about right. And I think it would be a terrible mistake, actually, to take the courts out of it, and I think it would be a terrible mistake for people who are regulated as well as people who think there's not enough regulation.
So it wins in equal measure, the government, against either side, whether it's this side bringing a case or this side bringing a case, the government wins most of the time.
I think that's right. I mean, that's kind of, I don't have any hard statistics, but I read the court opinions when they come out. And
about half the time the cases come from one side and half the time the cases come from the other side.
I think in general that's true.
Can we move just quickly to job creation, whether it's Pacific salmon country or the greater Yellowstone area or Florida Keys? How does the Endangered Species Act help in job creation?
I'm sorry, you're asking me?
Yes, please.
Well, as the Edwards Aquifer example shows, I think if you take the broad picture about does the Endangered Species Act make the administration of natural resources and the management of natural resources in this country better, more sustainable for the long term, and we depend upon those resources for all kinds of economic activity, I think the answer is clearly yes, it does make it better. Edwards Aquifer, I mean, the jobs that are thousands of jobs that are dependent upon that are more secure, absolutely more secure because of the Endangered Species Act.
Mr. Suckling, could you take on that question, please?
There was a recent study by some economists at MIT to try to answer the question of whether environmental regulations were hurting the economy or not. So they ranked every state in the country based on the strictness of its environmental laws, and then they ranked every state based on its economic health. And they found that the states with the strongest environmental laws were the states with the strongest environmental health as well. And that really is a good indicator of what I think we all know in some degree, which is that protecting the environment is good for the economy.
Okay. Mr. Tutchinell, again, the big charge here is that many of these are just frivolous lawsuits encouraged by the fact that there's an Endangered Species Act. How much money do you make when you bring a frivolous lawsuit?
Zero. You could be sanctioned by the court, and you could have to pay the other side's fees. It's unethical to file a frivolous lawsuit.
Okay, so we're really not talking about frivolous lawsuits then?
No, I think the criticism is actually directed at successful lawsuits where the plaintiffs have proven the government behaved in an unjustified manner.
If your organization defended the rights of veterans or small businesses, brought a substantial lawsuit, would the courts award attorney's fees?
Well, we have to meet three criteria at least. We have to win. We have to convince the court that the government's position was substantially unjustified. And then we have to convince the court that the amount of fees we've sought is reasonable. And if we can do all three of those, we could get recovery. Okay,
so there is a test that has to be met, and only then are you compensated for the case. Which
yes, in a typical case, we never receive what we ask for, and it's not a productive way to make a living.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.